3 seconds into Jessica's Instagram live, I realized she was tearing me apart in front of thousands of strangers, her voice dripping with mockery as she panned the camera around my living room, calling my home a dusty old museum and me a relic who didn't belong in her perfect world. I stood frozen in my own hallway, gripping the doorframe, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst, watching my daughter-in-law humiliate me like I was nothing more than a prop in her shiny influencer life. She laughed, waving her manicured hand at my grandmother's quilt on the couch, saying it looked like something from a thrift store reject pile. And her followers flooded the comments with laughing emojis and cruel jabs about how I must be too old to know better. I wanted to scream, to storm in and rip that phone from her hand, but I didn't, because something in me snapped not into anger, but into a cold, clear resolve that this woman who'd married my son was about to learn she'd picked the wrong person to mess with. Hello, I'm Eleanor Harris, 69 years old, living in Asheville, North Carolina in the same craftsman house my husband Robert and I bought 40 years ago. Before I dive into this story, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and comment with where you're watching from. Your support means everything. Let me take you back to how this all started, because this wasn't just about one Instagram live. It was years of Jessica chipping away at me, treating me like I was invisible or worse, a burden she had to tolerate. Jessica's a fashion influencer, 35 years old, with over 500,000 followers, who think she's the queen of style and grace. She married my son Michael 5 years ago, and from the start, she had this way of looking at me like I was a piece of furniture she wanted to replace. Michael's 40, a marketing manager who thinks Jessica hung the moon, and I love him, but he's blind to how she twists things to get her way. They don't have kids, which Jessica says is because she's too busy building her empire, but I think it's because she can't stand sharing the spotlight even with her own family. That day, the Instagram live wasn't planned, at least not for me. Jessica and Michael showed up unannounced on a Saturday, claiming they wanted to spend quality time together, which I should have known was a lie, because Jessica doesn't do anything without a motive. I was in the kitchen, making coffee, when I heard her voice from the living room, loud and performative, like she was on a stage. "Guys, you won't believe the vibe of this place," she said, her phone propped on my coffee table as she spun around, showing off my home to her audience. "It's like stepping into a time capsule from the 1920s, but not in a cute vintage way, more like nobody's touched it since Prohibition." Her laugh cut through me sharper than a knife, and I stepped into the hallway just in time to see her zoom in on my quilt, the one my grandmother stitched by hand when she was pregnant with my mother. "Can you believe this thing?" she said. "Eleanor thinks it's an heirloom, but it's giving garage sale energy." I stood there, my coffee mug burning my palm because I'd forgotten to set it down, my mind racing to process what was happening. This wasn't just a casual jab, it was a public attack, and the comments pouring in on her live made it worse. "OMG, get that old lady some taste," one said. "Why do you even visit her?" another chimed in. I felt my face flush, not with shame, but with a fury I hadn't felt in years, because this was my home. The place where Robert and I raised Michael, where we danced to old jazz records in the dining room, where I still set out 2 plates, sometimes out of habit, even though he's been gone 3 years. And Jessica was turning it into a punchline for clout. I could have confronted her right then, but I didn't, because I knew she'd twist it, make me look like the crazy old woman her followers already thought I was. Instead, I slipped back into the kitchen, pulled out my phone, and started recording her from the doorway, not to post online, but to have proof, because I'd learned a long time ago as a history teacher that evidence matters. Jessica kept going, oblivious to me, pointing out my outdated furniture, my cluttered bookshelves, even my garden, visible through the window, which she called a weed patch, despite the hours I spent tending it. Michael was there sitting on the couch, scrolling his phone, not saying a word, which hurt almost as much as Jessica's words, because my own son didn't see a problem with his wife dragging me through the mud. When she finally ended the live, I walked into the living room, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "Jessica, that was disrespectful," I said, keeping it simple because I wanted to see how she'd react. She rolled her eyes, tossing her hair like I was a child throwing a tantrum. "Oh, Eleanor, it's just content, relax. Nobody takes it seriously." Michael looked up then, finally noticing something was off, but he didn't back me up. Just said, "Mom, Jess is just joking. It's her brand." I stared at him, my son, who I'd raised to respect people, and I realized he wasn't going to stand up for me, not against her. That's when I knew this wasn't a one-time thing, this was a war. Jessica had been waging for years, and I'd been too polite to fight back. The rest of their visit was tense. Jessica acted like nothing happened, chatting about her upcoming fashion event, a big showcase she was hosting in Asheville to launch her new clothing line. She mentioned it casually, but I caught the gleam in her eye when she said she'd love to use my house as the venue because it had potential for a before and after transformation. I said, no, flat out told her my home wasn't a set for her show, but she just smiled that fake smile of hers and said, "We'll talk about it later. Eleanor, you'll come around." Michael nodded along, like it was already decided, and I felt this sinking dread because I knew Jessica didn't take no for an answer, not when it came to her image. After they left, I sat in my living room staring at that quilt. She'd mocked, replaying her words in my head, not because I was hurt, but because I was planning. I wasn't going to let her walk all over me anymore. I pulled out my laptop and started digging into Jessica's online presence, something I'd never done before because I didn't care about her influencer world. But now I needed to understand my enemy, and what I found lit a fire in me. Her Instagram was a curated lie, perfect outfits, perfect life, perfect story about growing up in a wealthy Charleston family with a historic mansion and private schools. Except I knew it wasn't true because Michael had mentioned years ago that Jessica grew up in a regular suburb in Raleigh. Her parents were teachers, not aristocrats. She'd built her brand on a fantasy, and I started wondering what else she was hiding. That's when I called Marjorie, my best friend, who owns an art gallery downtown and knows everyone in Asheville. "Marjorie," I said, my voice low like I was plotting a heist, "I need your help with something." She didn't hesitate, just said, "Name it, Eleanor. I've been waiting for you to stand up to that woman." I told her about the Instagram live, the quilt, the fashion event, and my hunch about Jessica's fake backstory. Marjorie got quiet for a second, then said, "You know my grandson Liam's a tech whiz. He can dig up anything online if you want dirt on Jessica. He's your guy." I didn't even think twice. I said yes because I was done playing nice. Liam came over the next day, a lanky 22-year-old with a laptop covered in stickers and a grin that said he loved a challenge. I showed him Jessica's Instagram, the Charleston story, the comments from her followers who ate it up. "Mrs. Harris," he said, tapping away at his keyboard, "if she's lying about her past, there's a trail somewhere. People always slip up online." He started pulling up old posts, archived tweets, even a high school yearbook photo from Raleigh that didn't match the glamorous image Jessica sold. It wasn't much yet, but it was enough to make me realize I was onto something. By the end of that week, I had a folder on my laptop labeled Jessica with screenshots, notes, and a grainy photo Liam found of her at a community college event 10 years ago. Nothing like the elite upbringing, she claimed. I wasn't sure what I'd do with it yet, but holding that evidence felt like holding a weapon, something I could use when the time was right. And I knew the time was coming because Jessica wasn't going to stop, not until she'd turned my life into a backdrop for her lies. What she didn't know was that I wasn't the quiet old lady she thought I was. I was Eleanor Harris, and I was ready to fight for my dignity, my home, and the truth she'd spent years burying. Jessica's voice sliced through my house like a blade shouting into her phone about how I was ruining her perfect event by refusing to let her turn my living room into a runway for her fashion showcase. I stood behind the kitchen door listening, my blood boiling as she called me a stubborn old fool who didn't know what was good for her own home, not caring that I could hear every word because to her I was just a problem to be managed. She was pacing my dining room, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor I'd polished for decades, planning to transform my house into a stage for her brand, without my permission, like my life was just a set she could rearrange. I gripped the doorknob so hard my knuckles ached, knowing this was the moment I had to act, because if I let her walk over me now, she'd never stop. This wasn't just about a party. It was about Jessica trying to erase me from my own story. After that Instagram live where she humiliated me in front of her followers, she'd been relentless calling, texting, showing up unannounced to convince me to let her host her fashion event here. She said my house had character, which was code for something she could exploit to make her look authentic to her audience. I'd said no every time, but Jessica didn't hear no, not when it came from someone she thought was beneath her. Michael, my son, was no help. He'd just shrug and say, "Mom, it's a big deal for Jess. Maybe you could compromise, like letting her take over my home was a small favor." That day, she'd barged in while I was gardening, claiming she needed to measure the space for her event. I followed her inside, watched her pull out a tape measure, and start marking my living room like she owned it, talking into her phone about lighting setups and VIP guest lists. "Jessica," I said, stepping into the room, "I told you no, this isn't happening here." She barely looked up, just waved me off like I was a fly. "Eleanor, we're doing this. It's too late to back out now. I've already told my sponsors the venue's set." That's when she got on her call loud enough for the neighbors to hear ranting about how I was sabotaging her career. I didn't yell back because I'd learned from the last time that losing my temper gave her power. Instead, I grabbed my phone and texted Marjorie, telling her it was time to move forward with our plan. Marjorie had been my rock since this started her gallery connections, giving us access to people who knew Jessica's world. Liam, her grandson, had been digging deeper into Jessica's past, finding more cracks in her story, like a deleted blog post from 10 years ago, where she talked about growing up in a trailer park, not a Charleston mansion. It wasn't enough to take her down yet, but it was fuel for what I was building. I slipped out to meet Marjorie at her gallery while Jessica was still measuring my furniture. "She's escalating," I told Marjorie, handing her a coffee as we sat in her back office. "She's acting like my house is hers and Michael's letting it happen." Marjorie nodded, her eyes sharp. "Eleanor, you've got enough to start pushing back. Liam's got a lead on an old friend of Jessica's from Raleigh who might talk if you want to go that route." I thought about it for a second, picturing Jessica's smug face on that Instagram live, and said, "Do it. I need something solid before she turns my house into her circus." Liam got to work that afternoon, tracking down the friend, a woman named Sarah, who'd gone to high school with Jessica. Sarah was hesitant at first, but after Liam showed her Jessica's latest post, claiming a privileged upbringing, she agreed to talk. Over a video call, Sarah spilled everything. Jessica had been a regular kid, no mansion, no private schools, just a girl who dreamed big and wasn't afraid to bend the truth to get there. Sarah even had photos from a school talent show where Jessica wore a homemade dress, not the designer labels she now claimed she'd always had. It was small stuff, but it added up, and I felt this surge of momentum like I was finally catching up to her. Back home, Jessica had left, but not before sticking post-it notes on my furniture with instructions for her event crew. I tore them off one by one, my anger steadying into something colder, more focused. I called Michael that evening, hoping I could get through to him before things got worse. "Michael," I said, keeping my voice calm, "your wife's planning to use my house without my consent. You need to talk to her." He sighed like I was the one being unreasonable. "Mom, it's just one night. It'll be good for her brand, and it's not like you're using the space for anything." I paused, letting his words sink and realizing my son saw me the same way Jessica did, irrelevant. "Michael, if this happens, I'm not staying quiet," I said, and hung up because I was done begging for respect. The next day, I got a call from Liam saying he'd found something bigger, an old tax record showing Jessica's parents had filed for bankruptcy when she was a teenager, completely contradicting her story of inherited wealth. It wasn't public, but Liam knew someone who could verify it if we needed to go that far. I told him to hold off because I wanted to be strategic, not just throw punches. Instead, I started reaching out to my old students from my teaching days, many of whom were now local business owners or journalists in Asheville. I didn't tell them everything, just said I needed support for a personal matter, and they showed up, no questions asked, because that's what community does. Jessica's event was 2 weeks away, and she was ramping up the pressure, posting teasers on Instagram, hinting at a historic venue with shots of my front porch. Her followers were eating it up, but I saw the comments starting to shift, a few locals recognizing my house and asking why she was using it. I didn't respond online, but I noted every username because I knew they'd be useful later. Marjorie suggested we leak a small piece of what we had to test the waters, so I gave Liam the go-ahead to send an anonymous tip to a local blogger who'd clashed with Jessica before. The blogger posted a vague story about an influencer stretching the truth about her roots, and it got traction. Not enough to spook Jessica, but enough to make her nervous. By the end of that week, Jessica showed up again, this time with a contract she wanted me to sign giving her permission to use my house. "Eleanor," she said, her voice all fake sweetness, "this is just a formality to keep things legal. Let's not make this harder than it needs to be." I took the contract, didn't sign it, and said, "I'll have my lawyer look it over." Her smile faltered for a second because she didn't expect me to have a lawyer, but she recovered fast. "Fine, but don't drag this out. My team's on a tight schedule." After she left, I called Leonard Walsh, a lawyer who'd been one of my students 20 years ago, and asked him to stall her with legal jargon until I was ready to strike. I wasn't just fighting for my house anymore. I was fighting for every time Jessica had made me feel small, every time she'd laughed off my objections, every time Michael had chosen her over me. And I was building something bigger than her, lies, a network of people who saw me for who I was, not the caricature she'd painted. Jessica thought she could steamroll me because I was 69 and alone, but she was about to find out that age didn't make me weak, it made me dangerous. Jessica pushed me out of my own living room in front of 200 guests, her hand firm on my shoulder as she hissed for me to stay out of her shot because I was ruining her perfect fashion showcase. The crowd gasped, some laughed, others whispered as I stumbled backward, catching myself on the wall, my face burning with humiliation while camera flashes lit up the room, capturing every second of my daughter-in-law, treating me like garbage in the house I'd built with my husband. She turned back to her audience, all smiles, waving like nothing had happened as she introduced her clothing line, but I saw the truth in her eyes. She wanted me gone, not just from the event, but from her life. That moment wasn't just a push, it was a declaration of war, and I was ready to burn her world down. The fashion showcase was Jessica's big moment, the culmination of weeks of her ignoring my refusals and turning my house into her personal stage. She'd brought in decorators, event planners, even a red carpet that covered my hardwood floors, all without my consent, because she decided my no didn't matter. Michael had been useless telling me to let it go, because it was just one night, but I knew this was about more than a party. It was about Jessica proving she could control everything, including me. The event started smoothly, or so Jessica thought. Guests arrived in fancy dresses and suits, sipping cocktails in my backyard, while influencers snapped photos of my garden now lit up with string lights Jessica had ordered. I stayed upstairs at first, watching from my bedroom window as my home became unrecognizable. Marjorie had told me to lay low until we were ready, but when I saw Jessica posing on my porch for a magazine shoot, I couldn't stay hidden. I went downstairs in my best dress, not to blend in, but to remind her whose house this was. That's when it happened. Jessica was in the living room giving a speech about her journey as a designer when she saw me standing near the doorway. Her face tightened for a split second before she marched over, grabbed my arm, and pushed me out of view. "Eleanor," she whispered, her voice venomous, "you're not part of this, go upstairs." The push wasn't hard, but it was public, and the room went quiet as people realized what she'd done. I caught Marjorie's eye across the crowd, and she nodded slightly, signaling it was time. I didn't go upstairs. I walked to the kitchen where Liam was waiting with his laptop already logged into the blogger's account we'd been working with. "Now?" he asked, and I said, "Now." He hit send on a post. We'd prepared a detailed exposé with Sarah's photos, the tax record, and screenshots of Jessica's old posts, contradicting her Charleston story. It went live during Jessica's speech, and within minutes phones in the room started buzzing as guests saw the post. I watched from the kitchen as Jessica's smile faltered, her eyes darting to her phone, which she'd left on a table. The mood shifted fast. A reporter from a local paper approached Jessica asking about the exposé, and her face went pale. She tried to laugh it off, saying it was a misunderstanding, but the damage was done. Guests were whispering, influencers were posting reactions, and I saw Michael in the corner, looking confused, like he was finally seeing his wife for who she was. I didn't feel triumph yet because I knew Jessica wouldn't go down without a fight, but I felt alive, like I'd taken my life back in that one moment. After the event, Jessica stormed into my kitchen where I was cleaning up, ignoring the chaos she'd left behind. "You did this," she said, her voice low and furious. "You think you're clever, Eleanor, but you just made a huge mistake." I looked at her straight in the eye and said, "No, Jessica, you made the mistake when you thought you could humiliate me in my own home." She stared at me like she was seeing me for the first time, then turned and left, slamming the door behind her. The fallout was immediate. The blogger's post went viral, racking up thousands of shares by morning. Jessica's followers started unfollowing her sponsors, reached out to Marjorie's contacts, asking questions about her credibility. I got a call from Leonard Walsh, saying Jessica's team had contacted him threatening a defamation lawsuit, but he laughed it off because we had evidence to back every claim. Michael showed up that evening, looking like he hadn't slept, his voice quiet. "Mom," he said, "I didn't know she was lying about all that. I thought she was just exaggerating for her brand." I didn't let him off easy. "Michael, you let her treat me like nothing. You need to figure out where you stand." He nodded and left, without arguing, which was a first. Marjorie and Liam came over to celebrate, but I wasn't ready to call it a win yet. Jessica was wounded, but she was dangerous, and I knew she'd come back swinging. I spent that week meeting with my old students now, my allies, planning our next move. We decided to host a community meeting at my house to talk about what had happened, not to gloat, but to show Asheville who I was not. Jessica's punching bag, but a woman who'd fought for her dignity and won. The meeting was set for the following week, and I knew it would be my chance to finish what I'd started. Jessica wasn't done with me, but neither was I with her. She'd pushed me thinking I'd break, but all she'd done was wake me up. I was Eleanor Harris, and I was just getting started. Jessica's Instagram post hit my phone like a slap, accusing me of sabotaging her career with lies and painting me as a bitter old woman trying to destroy her out of jealousy. I sat in my living room staring at the screen, my heart racing as her words racked up thousands of likes and comments, calling me pathetic, crazy, even dangerous, while she played the victim to her 500,000 followers. She turned the tables after I exposed her fake backstory at her fashion event, and now she was coming for my reputation with a vengeance I hadn't expected. I knew this was her counterattack, but seeing my name dragged through the mud in public made me realize this fight was far from over, and I had to hit back harder. Jessica's post went up 2 days after her event, when the viral expose about her lies was still trending. She didn't deny the evidence, Sarah's photos, the tax records, the screenshots. Instead, she spun it into a sob story about how her toxic mother-in-law had orchestrated a smear campaign to ruin her. She included a tearful video crying about how she'd worked so hard to build her brand, only for me to tear it down out of spite. Her followers ate it up, flooding my inbox with hate messages, some even showing up outside my house, taking photos like I was a criminal. I didn't panic because I'd seen this coming. Marjorie had warned me Jessica would play dirty, and Liam had been monitoring her online activity since the event. She's desperate, Liam said, showing me data on his laptop, her follower count dropping by 10,000 in a day, sponsors pulling out of her clothing line. But she's got a loyal core who'll believe anything she says. We need to shut that down. I nodded, knowing we had to act fast before her narrative took hold. I called Leonard Walsh, my lawyer, who'd already drafted a cease and desist letter for Jessica's defamation threats. Eleanor, he said, her post crosses a line. We can sue for libel, but it'll take time. What do you want to do now? I told him to hold off on the lawsuit because I wanted to handle this my way first. I'd spent years teaching history, showing my students how truth could outlast lies, and I wasn't about to let Jessica rewrite mine. Marjorie suggested we use the community meeting to fight back, not just to defend myself, but to show Asheville who Jessica really was. We spent days preparing, inviting local journalists, business owners, even some of Jessica's former collaborators who'd reached out after the expose. Liam put together a presentation with every piece of evidence we had organized like a courtroom case. I reached out to Sarah again, who agreed to record a video confirming Jessica's real background, not to hurt her, but to set the record straight. Meanwhile, Jessica kept the pressure on, posting daily updates about her struggle against my supposed attacks. She even got Michael to appear in one video, standing behind her looking uncomfortable as she talked about how I'd torn their family apart. That hurt more than the hate messages because I'd hoped Michael was starting to see the truth, but he was still under her spell. I didn't call him because I knew words wouldn't work. I needed him to see the consequences of her lies for himself. The day before the community meeting, Jessica's team sent Leonard a letter claiming I'd violated her privacy by sharing her tax records, which was nonsense because Liam had only accessed public data. It was a scare tactic, but it backfired because Leonard leaked the letter to a local news outlet who ran a story about Jessica's aggressive legal moves. The story mentioned my community meeting, framing it as a chance for residents to hear the truth, and suddenly we had twice as many people RSVPing. I spent that evening rehearsing my speech with Marjorie and Liam in my living room, the same one Jessica had mocked months ago. I wasn't nervous, just more alert and determined, because this wasn't just about me, it was about every person Jessica had stepped on to climb her ladder. Liam showed me a forum where her former assistants had started sharing stories about unpaid work, stolen designs, even verbal abuse, not physical, but the kind that left scars. I told him to save everything because we'd use it not to destroy her, but to make sure she couldn't hurt anyone else. The morning of the meeting, I got an unexpected visitor, Michael. He showed up alone, his face drawn like he'd been up all night. "Mom," he said, standing on my porch, "Jessica's falling apart. She's obsessed with this meeting. She thinks you're going to ruin her for good." I looked at him, my son, who'd let this happen, and said, "Michael, she's not falling apart, she's facing the truth. You can come to the meeting and see for yourself, or you can keep enabling her." He didn't answer, just walked away, and I knew he was wrestling with it, but I couldn't hold his hand through that choice. Jessica wasn't going to stop, and neither was I. She'd tried to bury me, but all she'd done was give me a platform to rise. The community meeting was hours away, and I was ready to show the world who I was. I stepped onto the stage in Asheville's community center, my voice steady as I faced 300 people packed into the room, and called out Jessica's lies, one by one, holding up evidence that silenced every doubt she'd planted about me. The crowd gasped as Liam's video played, showing Sarah's photos, the tax records, Jessica's old posts, all proving she'd built her influencer empire on a fake story, while I stood there, not as a victim but as a 69-year-old woman who'd fought back and won. Jessica was there in the back, her face crumbling as her followers turned their phones on her, live streaming her defeat to the world she'd tried to fool. That moment wasn't just my victory, it was proof that truth could break even the strongest lies. The community meeting was my battlefield. We turned the center into a stage for truth, with projectors, screens, and chairs, filled with people who'd known me for decades, plus strangers drawn by the viral drama. Marjorie had rallied her gallery contacts, Liam had spread the word online, and Leonard Walsh was there ready to step in if Jessica tried anything legal. I'd spent weeks building to this, knowing it was my chance to end Jessica's campaign against me. I started with a simple statement: "I'm Eleanor Harris, and I'm here to set the record straight." I didn't waste time on pleasantries, just laid out the facts, starting with Jessica's Instagram Live, where she humiliated me in my own home. I showed clips. Liam had saved her, mocking my quilt, my garden, my life, while her followers laughed. Then I moved to the fashion event, playing security footage from my house, showing Jessica pushing me out of my living room in front of her guests. The crowd murmured, some in shock, others in anger because they saw what I'd seen, a woman who thought she could erase me. Liam's presentation came next, a timeline of Jessica's lies, from her fake Charleston backstory to the tax records, proving her family's financial struggles. Sarah's video played, her voice calm as she confirmed Jessica's real past, growing up in Raleigh, not a mansion, but a modest house like most of us. I didn't stop there. I showed posts from Jessica's former assistants shared with their permission, detailing her unpaid work, stolen ideas, and cruel words. It wasn't about shaming her, it was about showing the pattern Jessica built her life by tearing others down. Jessica tried to interrupt halfway through, shouting from the back that I was lying, that I'd faked the evidence to destroy her. The crowd turned on her, booing, until she sat down, her face red with fury. I didn't flinch, just kept going because I'd prepared for this. Leonard stood up, then holding up the cease and desist letter we'd sent, proving Jessica's legal threats were empty. A reporter in the front row asked Jessica for a comment, but she stayed silent, her phone shaking in her hand as she realized her live stream was backfiring. Michael was there too, sitting near the front, his eyes fixed on me. I didn't look at him because I needed to finish this for myself, not for him. I ended with a call to action, not for revenge, but for accountability. Jessica's lies hurt people, I said, but we can choose truth over deception, community over clout. I invited anyone who'd been affected by her to share their stories, and by the end of the night, dozens of people came forward. Former collaborators, fans who'd been scammed, even a sponsor who'd pulled out after our exposé. The fallout was swift. Jessica's brand collapsed within days. Her clothing line canceled, her follower count cut in half. Sponsors dropped her one by one, and the local paper ran a front-page story about the meeting, calling me Asheville's unsung hero. Jessica left town a week later, moving to Charlotte, according to Marjorie's contacts. I didn't follow her because I didn't need to. She was gone from my life, and that was enough. Michael came to my house the day after the meeting, his voice quiet. "Mom, I was wrong," he said, standing in my kitchen. "I let her blind me. I didn't see what she was doing to you." I didn't forgive him right away because trust takes time, but I let him stay for coffee, and we talked for the first time in years about Robert, about us, about what family means. He's been coming over every week since, trying to rebuild what he broke, and I'm letting him because I believe in second chances, but only when they're earned. I hosted a community party at my house a month later, not for clout, but to thank the people who'd stood by me. Marjorie, Liam, my old students, even Officer Claire Thompson, who'd kept an eye on my house during the drama, all gathered in my backyard under the string lights Jessica had left behind. We laughed, ate, danced to the jazz records Robert loved, and I felt whole again, not because I'd won, but because I'd fought for myself. Jessica thought she could break me because I was 69, thought age made me weak, thought her lies were stronger than my truth. She was wrong. I'm Eleanor Harris, and this is my home, my life, my story. And nobody gets to tell it but me.